look forward to getting mine every month.
Okay.
I just started mine.
Dude, me too. We're synced.
You still get it, Grandma?
Sure do.
It's so heavy. I cried. It's happening again.
I'd invite you up, but I just got my book of the month.
Book of the month. Choose from 5 new books and get your favorite delivered to you monthly.
Stunning video templates. Each video maker is carefully designed to look professional. Our video makers are super easy to use and let anyone with an internet connection create high quality videos in seconds. Edit logos, mockups, videos, and design templates with just a few clicks. Each template is carefully made by design experts, so your work will always look great. Get started with the best video maker at Placy.net.
Just a little. Was she crossing some forbidden line, breaching her daughter's privacy? Hell no. What about veils? She figured he gave that up when he started French kissing her daughter. Another long swig and she went to work, her fingers flying over the keys. Within seconds, she was searching for anything she could on Xander Vale. His profiles, his conversations, his photos. She found him on Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook to begin with, and his privacy settings were set low, if at all, so she could snoop around easily. She scanned each screen eagerly, digging for anything she could find on the mystery man, who turned out to be not that much of a mystery. The long and short of it was that he'd grown up in Portland, gone to high school at Wilson, and was currently a college junior majoring in general studies. There were pictures of him partying, of course, at football games, downing cans of beer with various girls, none of whom was her daughter. Typical college boy. His parents still lived in Portland, were still married, and had 2 other younger kids, a boy and a girl. Xander had been an all-league football player in high school. Now he was enrolled in college at the University of Oregon. That would put him down in Eugene, hours away for most of the week until the end of the term in mid-June, unless he was taking online classes. And what had Xander said? That he was working part-time for Chuck? That he was going to spend the summer working full-time in Edgewater? Not good. She took a sip from her glass and discovered it near empty, which explained the slightly warm, buzzy feeling running through her veins. Maybe Harper's hot romance would flame out by summer. If only. Unlikely. It was already late May. Summer was just around the corner. From the bedroom, Reno gave out a low growl. Rachel spun in her desk chair and knocked over the remains of her wine, the glass toppling, the dregs of wine sloshing onto her desk. "Crap!" Again Reno growled, and this time she looked across the landing to the other side of the house, where the dog, tail stiff, hackles raised, stood facing the window. "It's nothing," she said, as much to herself as Reno, even though she couldn't help but feel a little niggle of anxiety, a tremor of fear as she righted the glass, sopped up what she could of the wine with some tissues. Then she snapped off the lights, crossed the landing in the darkness, and peered through the glass. It took a second for her eyes to adjust as she stared into the backyard. Nothing. The landscape was calm, right? Or did a shadow move in the darkness of the yard below? She squinted, the dog tense beside her. Was that a figure crouching, or the arbor vitae moving in the breeze? Every muscle in her body tensed. Did it straighten? Hidden in the shadows as it was? Oh, God. For a millisecond she was certain she saw the silhouette of a man, and Luke's image flashed through her brain. Luke as he might have been had he lived. "No!" she said aloud. "Get a grip. There's no one out there. No one. What happened 20 years ago is over." But the hairs on the back of her neck lifted, and her skin prickled, and her heart began to pound. The image wavered, then disappeared. A shadow, a puff of smoke, nothing more. It isn't Luke. It isn't Luke's ghost. It's your own damned mind conjuring images that don't exist. She bit her lip and saw no movement, heard nothing but the deep rumble in Reno's throat. Snapping the blinds closed, she said, "It's okay," to the dog, who hadn't let down his guard. Reno whined a bit and still stared at the window. But it could have been anything that had caught the dog's attention. A squirrel, or the neighbor's cat, even a skunk or raccoon, or nothing at all. "We're fine," she said, and walked into the bathroom, where she leaned over the basin and splashed cold water on her face. "There's nothing out there," she said, lifting her head to stare at her reflection in the mirror over the sink. Nothing. Her imagination was just running wild, that was all. Pull it all together. But the pale image staring back at her, water running down its cheeks and chin, looked scared as hell. "You can't do this," she warned the woman in the mirror. "You're a mother, a single mother who needs a job. You cannot fall apart." She gripped the edges of the sink and, closing her eyes, concentrated on her breathing. In, out, in, out. When she felt calmer, her rational mind taking over, she returned to the bedroom and opened the blinds again. The yard was empty. The dog now nuzzling his bed in the corner before curling into it. Everything was back to normal. But the man outside, the ghost, oh, for the love of God, Luke is not a ghost, she muttered, angry at herself. This was insane. She was just stressed about the kids, about not having a job, about the anniversary of Luke's death, about the articles in the paper, about trying to get along with her ex, about every damned thing. Get a frickin' grip! She let out a breath as she walked into the office, nervously peered through the front window to see the street was empty. Good. Taking a deep breath, she let her gaze travel to her computer. Opened to Xander Vale's Facebook page. The big man-child was still staring at her. "Stay away from my daughter," she said, and then heard herself. Dear God, when had she become her own mother? Wow. She wiped the remaining drops of wine with a clean tissue, wadded it, then tossed it in the trash. Then she closed down her search of Vale, making sure it was erased from her browsing history. Just in case. The dog began to make a racket again as she walked back into the bedroom, where Reno was on his back legs, trying to peer through the blinds. "Enough! Reno, down!" she ordered, as her phone began to chime and vibrate on her nightstand. Immediately she thought something had happened with the kids. Who else would be trying to reach her as it was nearly midnight? She glanced down at the screen and noted it wasn't Cade's number that flashed on the display. In fact, it wasn't any number she recognized. The text was a simple message. 3 little words. Yet they had the power to send a chill down her spine. "I forgive you." What? Who? Who forgave her? For what? Dread crawled through her as she waited. A minute passed. Then another. She thought that someone would type in that they'd sent the message in error, but when that didn't happen, she texted back, "Who is this?" Again she waited. The dog crouched on the floor, nose on the wall, eyes at the shuttered window. She licked her lips as the seconds strung into minutes. Fine. She called the number back and listened as the phone rang and rang and rang. No answer. Her heart was pounding and she told herself she was being ridiculous. It was a mistake, that was all. But the house seemed suddenly empty, and the ticking of the clock downstairs seemed to resonate. Again Reno began to whine. "Hush!" She chanced another look, parting the blinds with her fingers and surveying the yard. Nothing. No ghostly image crouching in the night. "Don't freak," Rachel warned herself, but it was too late. Her nerves were strung tight. A headache beginning and the feeling that something was very, very wrong burrowed deep in her soul. Chapter 14. The kids were asleep. Harper on the twin in the guest bedroom, Dylan on a daybed in the den. Cade grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat down at his laptop in the living room, some old cop drama playing silently on the television. Though he'd left the physical file for the Hollander case at the office, he still could access digital files, and he just wanted to check a few loose ends before he called it a night. He'd found that Richard Moretti was going to be at the hospital on Monday, so he thought he'd try to locate the doctor and ask him about the night of Luke Hollander's death. The discrepancy in the file was just a note. One of the EMTs who'd been in the ambulance had claimed that Luke was alive when he'd been left at St. Augustine's, but that note had been crossed out, and the ER doctor on duty, Moretti, had written that Luke had been DOA, dead on arrival. He'd been shot in the neck, clipping an artery, and he'd bled out, despite the best efforts of the emergency crew. It wasn't much, but a little detail that caught his attention. Also, he knew from conversations with Rachel that after Ned had gotten his daughter into the police car, he'd followed in his own vehicle and had made a stop at the hospital to check on his stepson, but it had been too late. Luke had already been gone. So, as Rachel waited at the police station under the wary eye of a female officer, Ned had gone home to break the news to his wife and take her to the hospital before they'd both returned to the police station. Only then had Ned made his statement, which meshed with that of the second officer on the scene. Cade took a swallow from his bottle. He knew the rest of the story. Rachel had been arrested. A case had been brought against her, but she'd been acquitted. Her father had been her most vocal supporter. He thought about Ned Gaston, the father-in-law who'd sat in this very department. Cade and Ned had never been close, but maybe that wasn't a surprise. Ned and Melinda had split within a year of Luke's death, and soon thereafter Rachel had gotten pregnant with Harper. One strike against Cade. And there had been many more over the years. Not only had Cade and Rachel divorced, and she'd accused him of an affair with Kaylee, but also there was the fact that Cade was now essentially doing Ned's job. Nope, there was no love lost between him and his ex-father-in-law. But that still wouldn't keep him from talking to Ned about Luke Hollander's murder. He glanced at the newspaper lying on the coffee table and read the article about the homicide again. This piece was pretty straightforward, just the facts as they had been reported, and to Mercedes Pope's credit, she didn't embellish the facts or report rumors or write anything that was too inflammatory. But what was next? How could Mercedes sustain a series about the homicide and keep readers interested by merely repeating what everyone already knew? By changing her reporting and inflating the petty drama? And embellishing the story of Violet Sperry, a girl who'd been at the scene of the homicide, whose testimony had been crucial in the trial of Rachel Gaston, and who was now dead, the victim of another homicide, 20 years to the date of the first one. Surely that new mystery wouldn't hurt circulation. Not that Cade believed Mercedes Pope was behind either of the murders. He was just damned sure she'd exploit them in order to sell a few more copies of the Edgewater edition. Click, click. Shivering in the darkness, the air rushing through the building cold as death, Rachel squeezes the trigger. Click, 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 click. She shoots again, and real bullets whiz through the old cannery, though the muzzle of her gun remains dark as she squeezes off the rounds. Bullets keep flying, not pellets as Luke had promised. Her insides freeze. This wasn't right. Click, click. Luke had said it was safe. Luke had lied to her, but why? This wasn't a game. It wasn't supposed to be real. No, she whispers, but she can't stop shooting. She just keeps squeezing, and the damned gun goes off, round after round. Click, click. No! Rachel cries. She turns, trying to run, trying to throw the gun away. Down the chute to the river, that's it. Her heart thundering, her teeth gritted. She hurls the damned gun, throws it into the chute that opens to the Columbia, hears it clatter against the rusting metal sides. But when she looks at her hands again, the gun is still clutched in her fingers. The same pistol? Or another? Real? Or fake? Panic strangles her. She hears a sound behind her, the scrape of a shoe. Spinning, she fires again and again and again. Click, click, click. Luke appears before her, staggering back. No! He is bleeding as he falls, his face ashen. Oh, God! Luke! No, no, no! She watches in horror as she sees the light in his blue eyes dim, his lids close. No, no, I didn't mean to. Sobbing, she kneels beside him. He can't be dead. Can't be. She feels as if her soul has been scraped raw as she touches his face. Cold. So cold. I'm sorry. Oh, God, Luke, I'm so sorry. At that moment, his eyes open and he stares at her. Where did you get the real gun? He whispers. From you. You gave it to me. Did I? I don't think so. Before her disbelieving eyes, his face begins to rot, his skin curdling away from his teeth, blood oozing, his nasal cavity exposed, his eyes bulging. She screams and scuttles away, across the old plank floors, scrambling to her feet as she hears the others, laughing, screaming, running, yet over it all the decaying, horrific thing lying before her whispers in a hoarse voice, I forgive you. What? No! Stop! She pulls the trigger hard, on purpose, aiming for the creature that had been Luke. Click, click, click. I forgive you, the thing says again. His hideous voice a rasp, yet somehow ricocheting off the walls of the cannery. Stop! Just stop! Rachel's eyes flew open. Her own words echoed in her head even as they jarred her awake. Sweating, breathing hard, her heart pounding a frantic tattoo, she was lying in her bed, not at the cannery. 20 years had passed. Luke was long dead. She was safe, in her own bedroom. There was no gun. She wasn't going to shoot anyone ever again. There was no gun. She wasn't going to shoot anyone, not ever. Pushing her hair from her eyes, she felt beads of sweat on her forehead. In fact, her entire body was moist. Get a grip. For the love of God, Rachel, pull yourself together. At the foot of the bed, Reno was curled in a ball, but he'd lifted his head to stare at her, as he always did when the onslaught of night terrors caused her to cry out. Sorry, she said, as if the dog could understand. But she was sorry, so damned sorry, for everything that happened that night. If only she hadn't gone to the cannery. If only she hadn't gotten separated from Lila. If only she hadn't had the wrong gun. What was it Luke had said in the nightmare? When she'd accused him of giving her the deadly, real pistol? Did I? I don't think so. She'd wondered about that. If only she'd known more about guns. Hell, she'd been a policeman's daughter. She should have had some insight into what was real and what was not. But the truth was she'd never held a pistol before that night. Ned Gaston had seen enough damage with firearms to never allow one in the house. He'd even kept his own service weapon at the station. Don't do this, she told herself, speaking to the dark room. It was over. Long over. Luke was dead. She eyed the clock. 2:47 a.m. Her phone was on the nightstand, and she checked it. I forgive you. The cryptic message was still there and had slid into her subconscious and her dream. Unfortunately, it had become part of her nightmare. Click, click. She froze. Waited. Click, click, click. What the hell? Cautiously, she threw off the quilt, crossed the room and paused with her hand on the doorknob. Did she hear footsteps? Anything other than the click, click from the bathroom? Steeling herself, she turned toward the bathroom, with its partially open door. A soft breeze slid into the room as she entered and sensed no one. She slapped on the light switch. As she did, the shade moved in the window, slamming against the sill twice. Click, click. No wonder. Because she'd cracked the window a couple of inches during her last shower, the shifting air was sucking the shade in and out, making the recurring sound she'd transferred to the firing of a pellet gun in her dream. She caught sight of her reflection in the mirror over the sink. White pallor, wild eyes, mussed hair, her own fears visible. Oh, crap, she said, and shook her head, talking to the woman in the glass. Harper's right. You are a freak. The reflection still looked scared as hell. Get it together, Rachel grumbled, before shutting the window and starting back to the bedroom. But she knew sleep would be elusive, if not impossible, and still she was on edge. If she'd left this window cracked, what about the others? She had a routine she followed when locking the house for the night. She'd start in the basement, check the windows, cellar door to the stairwell, then head to the first floor, where she'd do the same, and finally double-check every room on the top level. She always stopped to engage the security system, but then reminded herself it wasn't working. Hadn't been for months. Rachel slid into her slippers, threw on her robe, and, with Reno on her heels, went to the basement where she noted everything was secure. The door to the outside was locked and bolted. The windows were pulled tight and latched, one in the laundry room and two more in the storage area, which was overflowing and had been since they'd remodeled the attic into living quarters. No matter how often she sorted and organized the tax records, old schoolwork, clothes that no longer fit, and a variety of old electronic equipment, the pile of plastic crates and boxes seemed to grow. She made a mental note to have Dylan work on it next weekend. He was always rooting around down here anyway. On the first floor, she checked both the front and back doors, and the windows in the dining room, kids' rooms, and kitchen, as well as the living room and bathroom. As Reno brushed past her in the kitchen to get to his water dish, she noticed the old copy of the Edgewater edition, the pages folded open to the article about Luke's death in the cannery. Damn Mercy. Like a fishing hook, dragging her deep into the sea. That resurrection of the details of Luke's murder was taking her into dark places she'd tried for years to put behind her. The night terrors, the guilt, and now Violet's murder and the unsettling text message. She tossed the paper aside, realizing she needed to do something about it. The newspaper retrospective was making it all worse. She had to talk to Mercedes, hold her to the facts, and convince her to let the painful story go. Rachel couldn't stop the nightmares or the horror over Violet's death, but this news series, this was a devil she could grab by the horns. Chapter 15. Going to O'Callahan's hadn't been her smartest move. Drinking her first mojito hadn't been wise either. The second drink had been a mistake, and the third, a definite disaster. Maybe even a catastrophe, Kaylee thought as she woke up on Saturday morning, her head pounding, her thirst reminding her she hadn't tied one on like this for years. The room was shadowed, only the barest light of early dawn sifting past a rolling fog and the sheer curtains. After consuming the 3, or had it been 4 drinks, she'd made the smart decision not to get behind the wheel. Rather than call an Uber, she'd made the not-so-smart decision to allow a much more sober Travis McVeigh to drive her home. So now she had 2 headaches, the one pounding behind her eyes and the one snoring softly beside her. "Idiot," she whispered. She wanted to close her eyes and her mind to the night before, but couldn't. "What's done is done," her grandmother used to say. Deal with it. She rolled out of bed, threw on last night's jeans and a long-sleeved tee, then made a quick stop in the bathroom to wash her face and brush her teeth. Afterward, she downed a cup of water and snapped her hair into an unruly ponytail. Now or never. She found McVeigh right where she'd left him, lying on his back, his body half out of the rumpled sheets, his eyes closed, dark lashes lying against bladed cheekbones. God, she was a fool. He was naked, of course, his one bare leg exposed, one of his arms folded over his bare chest. Oh, geez, what were you thinking? That was the trouble. She hadn't been. "Hey, McVeigh," she said, poking his shoulder. "Rise and shine." "What?" He blinked his eyes open, stared up at her, and smiled widely. Then, as the situation hit him, the grin disappeared. "Oh, Jesus." "Yeah, my thoughts exactly." Neither one of them had ever expected they'd wake up in the same bed again. But last night, things had changed. She remembered kissing, hot and hard, their tongues colliding as they'd fallen onto the couch. Her hands had slipped beneath his shirt to touch rock-hard muscles, and she'd let go, wrapping her arms around him, feeling his hands on her buttocks. A zipper had hissed down, and then suddenly he'd stopped. He'd wrapped his arms around her, held her close, and whispered into her mussed hair, "I don't think I can do this, Kay." "What?" she'd murmured. "You'd hate me forever." "I already do," she teased, and had kissed him again. "No, that's the problem. You don't." "So, you're rejecting me?" "Never." He'd stared at her a second. "Go to bed, Kaylee." He'd been right. She'd known it then just as she knew it now. Even though the effects of the drinks hadn't worn off last night, the weight of his words had gotten through. "I don't care," she'd said. And she'd meant it then. He'd groaned, held her tight, and carried her into her small bedroom. They'd tumbled together onto the covers, and she'd thrown all caution to the wind, crossing a bridge she thought was long broken. Now, as more light made its way into the room, his gaze locked with hers as he too remembered, one big hand rubbing the beard shadow of his jaw. A strong jaw, in a handsome face, that she'd once thought she'd loved, a long, long time ago, before Cade.
"What were we thinking?"
he asked, raking stiff fingers through his hair.
Thinking didn't have much to do with it. Seemed like the right idea last night.
Lots of things did.
Amen to that.
His eyes, deep-set and intelligent, held questions that he didn't voice. But he obviously noted that she'd pulled on her jeans and shirt and had picked up her jacket, found on a hook near the door.
"Looks like you want to get going."
"Lots to do. Big case."
"Yeah."
He stood up then, and she turned away as she caught a glimpse of his long legs and tight buttocks. She felt a little catch in her throat, which was just plain ludicrous. "I'll be in the living room." Was that even her voice? So breathy? What the hell was wrong with her? As she walked into the living room, Kaylee heard the metallic sound of a zipper. She went directly to the front door, where her bicycle was propped against the wall to wait. When she turned and saw him, dressed and carrying the running shoes he'd kicked off with such force one had hit the closet door, causing it to rattle, she felt her throat go dry. She had loved him, and a bit of her heart cracked. But she didn't want to remember their short period together, so she pushed any memories far into a deep corner of her mind as he sat on the edge of the couch and tied the laces, then slapped his legs and stood. His hair was still rumpled, the edges of his mouth remaining hard as he said,
"Okay, let's go get your car."
"Good idea." Minutes later, he was driving her through the awakening town, a handful of cars rolling down the streets, headlights and taillights glowing through the heavy mist oozing in from the sea.
"I could buy us coffee,"
he said, nodding toward a kiosk where cars were collecting near the corkscrew ramp leading to the bridge that seemed to disappear into the mist. Maybe another time. But they both knew it would never happen.
"Okay."
He pulled into the near-empty parking lot of the Riverfront Mall and parked. As she reached for the door handle, he said,
"It was good to see you again, Kaylee."
"Yeah. You too." She stepped outside before she said anything further, anything she might regret. "Thanks." He too had gotten out of the car, letting it idle.
"Bye."
She managed a quick wave, and as she unlocked her car, she wondered what the hell she was doing, what she'd done, what she'd wanted to do. She and McVeigh were long over. That romantic ship had foundered before it had ever really set sail. So why did she still feel a distant yearning? Why the hell had she so willingly, no, make that so urgently, made love to him? Before the thought took root, she turned on her wipers and glanced in the rearview mirror, but his image was clouded by the condensation on the window. A good thing, she decided. She could only make out his silhouette as he leaned against his car, watching her drive off. She caught a glimpse of her own troubled eyes in the reflection. "God," she told the woman staring back at her. "For a smart woman, you're an idiot when it comes to men. Forget Travis McVeigh. Oh, and while you're at it, forget Cade Ryder, too." The downtown block seemed as lifeless and tired as Rachel felt late Saturday morning as she strode toward the newspaper office, determined to straighten out one thing in her life. Time to face Mercedes and deal with the stupid articles she was running on Luke's death. God, why now? Couldn't Mercedes just let the past lie? Of course not. As the sky darkened, Rachel steeled herself, then pushed open the door to the newspaper office on the first floor of a 2-story downtown building. Some of the buildings on this block had been refurbished, but not the offices of the Edgewater Edition. The same gold logo was emblazoned on the glass window, and inside, the faded wood floors and oversized desks that had been there when Rachel was a kid, visiting for a class field trip, were still in place, the large room separated by half walls of cubicles. "Can I help you?" asked a girl working on a laptop at her desk. Her brown hair was cut short, her face round, and she smiled as she looked up. "I'm here for Mercy," Rachel said, not breaking her stride as she passed the young woman's desk. "Wait, you can't go back there. Don't worry, we're friends. At least we used to be before she cracked open my worst nightmare and served it up to the whole damn town. But you're not supposed to go back there. It's okay, really. She wants to talk to me." "No worries," came a voice from behind a screen. "I'll handle it, Alexa." Mercy's head arose from the divider, a bland expression on her face as she tucked her reading glasses into her hair and motioned Rachel into the cubicle. "I'm surprised you came in." "Me too." She eyed her once-upon-a-time friend. "I felt like I had no choice, that you backed me into a corner." "We all have choices, Rachel." Mercy waved her into a single visitor's chair, and Rachel sank into it as Mercy sat behind the desk. "I just want the truth. You just want to sell papers. Okay, that too. And it doesn't matter that a lot of people are upset about it. News is news, even if it's old news." "Not so old now," Mercy said. "Violet was there that night, and now someone's killed her." "So?" Rachel said, stunned at the obvious track of Mercedes's thoughts. "You're trying to link the two deaths? That didn't make any sense." "I'm just saying it's a coincidence, that's all. You're pissing a lot of people off." Mercy let out a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, I know." She retrieved a newspaper from the stack on her desk. "Lila's decided to be outraged. It wasn't evident at the reunion meeting, but you must have got her going or else she stewed on it and got pissed. Anyway, she's called me and demanded that I stop writing about it. And she got her husband to send me a cease and desist email. And that's just for starters. Then there's Anessa. She might not have come to the reunion meeting, but she's damned certain that the articles about Luke's murder will have a negative impact. Bad publicity for the building that she and her husband now own. She sent me a furious text and threatened legal action." She could have a point. Maybe, but this is the type of story that will bring subscribers to the paper. This next week, I've got several other articles about the Seaview Cannery, the history, including the heyday of the plant when it was a primary source of income in the town, and the decline of the industry. And now I've got the Violet Sperry murder angle as well. I can tie her to the cannery. These are solid pieces, and together, they've got everything readers want. Drama, tragedy, survivors, and it all happened right here in Edgewater. You sold out the friends you grew up with. Oh, come on, Rach. None of us are really friends anymore. Acquaintances, yes, and we share a history, but really I'm not out to hurt anyone, and I didn't publish anything that I can't back up with my notes. My goal is to bring out the truth from that night. That's the mission of a journalist, the quest for the truth. I call BS. Mercy lifted a Diet Cola on her desk, and then, realizing it was empty, tossed it into a blue bin. You're entitled to your opinion. Don't dismiss me. I have 2 kids in high school who have already heard that their mother is a murderer thanks to the last article. How do you think they feel? You've got a kid, Mercy. Are you going to let Daisy read your account of that night in the warehouse? How's it going to go down when her friends ask her if her mom was really an accessory to murder? I was never formally charged with anything, and I was acquitted of all charges, and yet here I am. Rachel jabbed a finger into the stacks of freshly printed papers. I'm the killer who got away in the world according to Mercedes Pope. What am I supposed to tell my kids? Mercy sighed. What you've always told them. Look, I'm sorry if this embarrasses you. You think I'm embarrassed? Rachel's voice rose, indignation burning through her. That's not even close! Mercedes lifted both hands. Okay, so now, here's your chance to tell your side of it. I've wanted to interview you for days, so let's get down to it. Tell me everything you remember about that night. And since I'm doing a piece on the victim, on Luke, I'd like to hear what your home life was like, how you all got along, that sort of thing. Luke wasn't Ned's biological son, so there must have been some tension there. What? No! His real father is a felon, right? Didn't he beat his wife, your mother, Melinda Hollander? And I heard that your dad was the cop who put Bruce Hollander away. That's ancient history. No one's interested in it. Let's get this on record. To Rachel's horror, Mercedes actually turned, found her phone, and hit the record button. No! I just want some perspective, Mercedes insisted. To tell the story of the boy who lost his life in the cannery. Who exactly was he? For a second, Rachel was stunned into silence as she thought about Luke as he truly was. Complicated. Popular but secretive. An athlete who stood toe-to-toe with his stepfather if need be. A kid with a great sense of humor. A boy who loved to tease and taunt, though he always had his sister's back. I'm not talking about Luke. Then talk about that night. Let's hear your side. Rachel stopped short, shaking her head as she stared down at the phone. My side is in my statement to the police from 20 years ago. It hasn't changed, and I'm sure you've got a copy. But I'd like your perspective now and how you look back on it. Maybe you remember some details that weren't in the original report. Tell me what you think, what you remember, now that your dad isn't a cop and looking over your shoulder. My father had nothing to do with it. What I said was the truth. One of Mercedes's eyebrows cocked a fraction. We're all more careful when our parents are around, especially as children. Rachel stood then. My story hasn't changed. Placing both hands firmly on Mercedes's desk, she looked squarely into the other woman's eyes. And if you print one word that differs from what I said in the original police report, I'll sue you, Mercedes. And you can quote me on that. With that, she turned and left. I'm quivering in my boots, Mercedes called after her, and even had the audacity to laugh. You do that. Rachel ground out quietly as she flew out the door, turned away from the shop window, and collapsed against the stucco wall. A heavy mist was falling, quickly soaking into her hair. She hugged herself, trying to stop the tremors that rose from the cold deep inside her. So much had been ruined, and she didn't know when she'd have the energy for damage control. After these stories went out, would she ever find another job? Would she lose clients from her small business? Would the kids lose respect for her? Not that they treated her too well as it was, but she couldn't stand them using this as an excuse to make bad choices. Would the kids be ostracized at school? The rain began in earnest, and she pressed back against the building, wondering if she should make a run for her car or wait until it blew over. Suddenly, she wished she had the kids this weekend. She'd make them some comfort food, tomato soup and grilled cheese, and try to have one calm afternoon in a week of constant turmoil. Just then, Rachel noticed a shadow moving across the street in the narrow alleyway between two buildings. Someone stood there, his face in shadow. He seemed to be wearing a dark jacket with the collar turned up and a baseball cap pulled low. Was it just someone having a smoke? No, he was simply standing there, watching her. She glanced right and left to see if there was someone else he was keeping an eye on. Nope. She was the only person outside in the gray drizzle. Icy fear, cold as the rain penetrating her scalp. She told herself she was imagining things, that there really wasn't anything sinister about him, that she needed to keep her cool. But her skin prickled as she wiped the gathering moisture from her face and then cupped a hand to her forehead to shield her eyes and focus her gaze on him. A passing truck blocked her view momentarily, and then he was gone, the alley empty, leaving her to wonder if he had ever been there at all. Chapter 16. Monday morning the sky was clear, a few stars fading, the air fresh as Kaylee let herself in through the back door of the cedar and stone building housing the sheriff's department. A skeleton crew was manning the phones and desks until the shift change, so the offices were quieter than during the day. Just a few voices and footfalls audible over the rumble of air running through ducts overhead. Shedding her jacket in her locker, she was already mentally going over the Sperry case as she made her way to the lunchroom. After picking up her car on Saturday morning, she'd spent most of the weekend reviewing notes and interviews on the Sperry homicide, studying evidence and checking alibis, and allowing a little time for watching football. So far, Leonard Sperry's story was holding up. His fishing buddy had come through with an alibi, confirming Sperry's whereabouts near Bend in Central Oregon. Motel and restaurant receipts had placed him 250 miles from his home. The police were still waiting for cell phone records, but Kaylee assumed the information from the phone company would confirm his alibi. Meanwhile, Sperry had provided a copy of his wife's will, which indicated everything she owned was to be left to him. For good measure, he had supplied his will as well, and the reverse was true. Had he predeceased her, she would have inherited all of Leonard Sperry's worldly assets. They'd also provided a caveat that should they die together, everything was to be divided among 10 charities. They hadn't had children, and the only sibling either of them had was Leonard's estranged brother in Arizona, outside of Phoenix. Neither he nor their parents were mentioned in the wills, as both Violet and Leonard had assumed they would outlive them. Sperry had supplied copies of their life insurance policies, 2 on Violet's life to the tune of over $300,000, enough for Leonard to buy out his parents or take a world cruise or whatever. In the lunchroom, where Drummond, a wiry deputy with a flat-top haircut straight out of the 50s, was leaning over the sports page at one of the round tables, she listened to the hiss of the Keurig machine as it spat out her single cup. As she added cream to her coffee, she made a mental note to double-check that Leonard didn't have a girlfriend tucked away somewhere. He didn't seem the type, and had appeared convincingly grief-stricken and horrified at his wife's murder. But really, who knew what went on behind the closed doors of a marriage? Theoretically, it was possible Sperry could have hired a killer to do his dirty work, pay the murderer off out of the insurance proceeds, and still pocket a lot of cash. All tax-free. But it felt wrong. She just couldn't see Leonard Sperry as the mastermind to take out his wife. At least not yet. Blowing on her cup so that the coffee would cool, she made her way to her desk, a neat and tidy space, not one picture resting on it nor pinned to the padded sides of the cubicle. Kaylee liked to keep her workspace clean and impersonal, almost sterile. Quickly she scrolled through her email. With any luck today, some footage from cameras in the area surrounding the Sperry home would come in soon. And Violet Sperry's gun, where the hell was it? Part of the robbery? The only object taken? Seemed unlikely. Violet's laptop, money in her dresser, those valuables had been left behind. Only the gun was missing, according to the husband. In her mind's eye, Kaylee imagined Violet hearing a noise. Maybe the dogs alerting her, and grabbing her gun, going to investigate, and ending up confronting the intruder. In the ensuing struggle, the gun went off and the killer tossed her over the rail, then left in a panic that things had not gone as planned. So what had been the plan? And why the tape over her eyes? Had he slapped it there and intended to kidnap or rape her, but she drew the gun and he was forced to kill her by pushing her over the railing? She bit her lip, replaying the scene over and over in her mind. Why was the tape placed over her eyes? Why not over her mouth to cut off her screams? Had the killer entered the bedroom, caught her unaware, and taped her eyes shut so she couldn't identify him later? Then somehow she grabbed her gun, but the dogs, and she would have woken. No. The struggle had happened outside the bedroom. That much seemed clear by the damage to the railing. Kaylee only hoped that Violet had fought hard to fend off her attacker, and that if she had, she'd managed to claw at him, collecting hair or skin beneath her fingernails. If so, the scrapings could be analyzed for DNA. "And then we'll get you," she said, as if the killer could hear her. A hand slapped her desk and she jumped, nearly spilling what was left of her coffee. "Mornin', sunshine," Jerome Biggs said, and she realized she'd been at her desk for over an hour. The day shift was clocking in, voices and laughter breaking what had been near silence. "Don't feel like sunshine. Rough weekend?" He smiled, a big toothy grin that flashed white against his dark skin. Once a basketball player, now a detective, Jerome was her partner who had been on vacation the past week. "Busy," she said, and for a second she remembered the weight of Travis McVeigh's body lying naked and sweating atop hers. Oh, good Lord. "Let me guess. Working your tail off down here. Sperry murder." "I worked from home, but yeah, since you were off having the time of your life on vacation last week, let me catch you up." "I don't know if painting the house in this weather counts as having the time of my life, but yeah, I heard we caught the case. Bring me up to speed." So as he leaned a hip against her desk, Kaylee told him all the details, with one exclusion. She didn't mention that she'd called Cade Ryder to the scene. She didn't need the lecture about jurisdiction or crossing all kinds of lines, both professional and personal. Biggs would find out soon enough. But for now, she kept that bit of information to herself. Hands shaking, Rachel stared at the bottle of Xanax tablets and wondered if it was worth it to finally relax and get some sleep. She put the bottle on the shelf in the medicine cabinet, pressed her palms to her chest, and tried to take a deep breath. She had to get a grip. The last 2 nights had been okay, but disintegrated into night terrors that kept her from falling back to sleep. Now here she was on Monday morning, a basket case, when she should be online looking to send out a new wave of job applications or, at the very least, drumming up customers for her freelance business. She would be relieved to have the kids back this afternoon, grateful for the company and the routine of corralling them. Last night had been particularly bad, as she'd been pulled from another nightmare by the frantic barking of the dog, who'd been pawing at the bedroom door to get out. "Reno, stop!" she'd ordered, pushing back the covers in a mixture of annoyance and alarm. She hadn't wanted to get out of bed, but usually the dog didn't go off unless something was wrong. Groaning, Rachel had forced herself to her feet and found her slippers, knowing she'd have to check the house from top to bottom. As soon as she opened the bedroom door, the dog disappeared down the stairs as if honing in on a target. Oh, God, was someone in the house? Pausing to grip the banister at the top of the staircase, Rachel had listened cautiously, but heard only the staccato bark of the frantic dog. Pulse thrumming in her ears, muscles taut, she had hurried down. "What's wrong with you?" she'd called, as she found the dog pacing at the front door, sniffing at the threshold. Was someone there? Biting back fear, she'd ignored her accelerating heartbeat and reached for the door handle to ensure the bolt had caught. It was locked, thank God, but that didn't stop the dog from letting out a new string of guttural barks. Reno was on alert. Nose to the door, he was ready to bolt outside. His flesh quivered, the fur on the back of his neck stood at attention, and he let out a high nasal whine when she refused to open the door, as if he'd scented a squirrel or raccoon or some other night creature daring to cross his yard. "Oh, geez," she let out a sigh. "Stop it." But the dog wasn't about to give up and started scratching frantically at the door, ready to bolt outside and scare off or kill the invader. "You're being ridiculous. Stop it. Now!" she'd ordered, and stood on her tiptoes to peer through one of the 3 small windows that ran across the top of the door. She half expected to see a coyote scurrying through the shadows. Instead, she caught a glimpse of a smallish dog hurrying past, a man in dark clothes, cap over his ears, holding the animal's leash in one hand and something else, a bag of some kind in the other. Just a guy, walking his dog. At 3 a.m? Who walked their dog in the middle of the night? She felt a frisson of fear scuttle down her spine as she watched the man glance back at the house, then hustle his dog into a white sedan parked 3 houses down. Within seconds, he was driving off, taillights disappearing as he rounded the corner. "It's nothing," she'd told the dog, but didn't believe it for an instant. It was odd. Out of the ordinary. What had her father said about things that seemed out of sync? That if something seemed wrong or out of place, it usually was. She heard his advice as if he were standing next to her. "Pay attention, Rach. It's the little inconsistencies. Something a bit unusual, a tiny detail that a person remembers that often is the start to cracking a case." Her calves had begun to ache from the strain of standing on her tiptoes, so she'd lowered herself and tried to twist the knob and open the door. It didn't budge. Locked securely. She started her security ritual, heading down to the basement to double-check that every lock was engaged, every deadbolt thrown, every window unmoving, until she was certain the house couldn't be breached. Although she knew the house was secure, she didn't feel safe. Not tonight. "We'll be fine," she'd told the dog as she'd settled into bed again. But she'd known it was a lie. Now her body was riddled with exhaustion, jacked with stress. Anxiety was nothing to sneeze at, nothing to ignore. Rachel knew it. But as she stared at the pills in her medicine cabinet, she couldn't get herself to pop one. She'd been off the Xanax for weeks now, and taking the medication seemed like a step backward. Even though she realized that wasn't the case, she didn't want to lean on any more medication. She palmed the bottle, counted the pills, making certain no more had gone missing. All accounted for, but maybe she should have pushed the kids harder. Was she too loose with them? A bad parent? Well, she'd have a look in their rooms today, before they got home. A parent's prerogative. She recapped the bottle and threw on running clothes, snapped on Reno's leash, and headed out. Her nerves were still jangled from lack of sleep, and throughout the weekend she'd felt a trepidation about her solo runs in the early morning, but she refused to be intimidated, couldn't allow it. With her dog by her side and pepper spray in her pocket, she headed out the back door and pushed through the gate into the street. Reno kept pace as she ran downhill toward town, where a lingering mist still clung to the river. The air was crisp, the sky a promising bold blue, and she suspected the mist would burn off by noon. The cool air should have cleared her head, but instead the text floated through her mind. "I forgive you. Received 20 years from the day of Luke's death." Of course, she'd first thought of her brother. He was the one person whom she'd so horribly wronged, but he was long dead, and she didn't think St. Peter was handing out cell phones at the pearly gates. Nope. The text was from a living, breathing person, either a mistake or a prank. And she was leaning toward the idea that it was sent in error. She avoided a puddle and kept running, thinking of anyone who might have sent it. One of the people at the reunion meeting? Someone close to Luke. Lila, who'd been left to deal with having his baby. Mercedes, who was hell-bent to write her series about his death and was pissed that Rachel hadn't agreed to an interview. Nate, his best friend, who had seemed so untethered after Luke's death. Her own mother? No, not Melinda. His father, then, out of prison recently. What about a half-dozen others, friends who were close to him? But why wait all these years and then suddenly now try to freak her out? Who hated her that much? She passed by the cannery, didn't stop, just circled back and ran directly home. She smiled as Reno trotted the familiar path to the side gate and back door. Sliding the lock closed, she pushed off her sneakers, let Reno off his leash, then reached for a mug. After coffee, a shower, and a cup of yogurt, she sat at her computer for a while, going over responses to her resumes. 2. One that, should she get the job, would require relocation to Seattle. No thanks, not until Dylan had graduated, if then. The other with a note that the position she'd inquired about had been filled. 2 strikes, she said. Lapsing back to her former worries, she wondered about telling Cade about the text message. As a cop, he could make inquiries. It wasn't a threat, just forget it. She had work to do. The kids were gone, wouldn't be home until after school, so despite all of her lectures about privacy, she braced herself for the invasion of her kids' rooms. Determined to get to the bottom of whatever her son was hiding, she ignored all the crime scene tape and "do not enter" warnings posted over Dylan's door and started searching. She didn't know what she was looking for. She hated to think what she might find. A cache of some kind of contraband? Drugs? Weapons? She felt like a thief slipping into a house that was still occupied. Ludicrous as it was, her heart was pounding and she was jumpy, though she had every right to search his room. This was her house, and, more importantly, he was her son. She was responsible for his health and welfare. She did worry that he had probably set up cameras in the room and even now could be watching her on his phone. Tough. The room was a sty, but that would be something he'd have to do himself once he was home. She was laying down the law. So she didn't pick up the cans and plates and trash on the floor, nor did she change his bed or even straighten the covers, even though she'd checked between the mattress and box springs, then under the bed. Years of dust had gathered there, along with more cans, bottles, and dirty paper plates that had been stashed out of sight. She viewed the bottom side of the box springs. Nothing. She opened the vent from the furnace. All she found was a fork that had slipped through the slatted cover. His bookcase was cluttered, but hid nothing. His nightstand drawer was stuffed with a box of Band-Aids, a half-finished assignment for a class he took in grade school, a TV remote, lip balm, a pack of tissues, a bag of cough drops, and various game controllers. The area around his computers showed nothing out of the ordinary, and, of course, the computers were all password protected, so she couldn't check what he'd been doing online. His chest of drawers held folded clothes, nothing hidden beneath or behind. In the closet, his hamper was full of dirty, wrinkled clothes, and there were boxes of old toys and treasures that, she assumed, he no longer noticed. Some shirts were draped on hangers. There were a few small empty boxes. Overall, nothing out of the ordinary. She saw that his shoes were kicked into a corner, and that's when she noticed a slight bulge in the carpet, just inside the bifold closet door, a little lump no bigger than a mouse. She bent down and ran her hand over the bump. Thankfully, it didn't move, didn't appear to be alive. With a little more inspecting, she saw that the carpet wasn't tacked down just inside the door. Instead, it was taped, and within, a sock containing a thick roll of money. Ones, fives, tens, and 20s. $813. Even though he supposedly owed $100 to that bully Schmidt for some kind of computer bet and acted as if he couldn't pay it, the kid was willing to work off a loan with Rachel? Not good, she said aloud, her dread mounting. She tucked the sock and money in the back pocket of her jeans, then continued searching the closet, half expecting to find a stash of weed, Pills, God knew what kind of drugs, in the toes of his shoes or pocket of a jacket. She thought of the pills from her own bottle of Xanax, pills that she'd thought had gone missing, and the way Harper had shown her disdain. "We didn't steal your damn drugs. What do you think we'd do with them? Sell them at school?" Dylan had appeared stunned, as if it had never crossed his mind. Or had she misread his guilt? She went over his room again, locating nothing more, then racked her brain for other possible hiding spots. The back porch where he kept his bike? She quickly made a check, but it turned out to be clean. The shed next to the carport where his skis and skateboard and camping gear were tucked away. Nothing there either. She stood for a second in the drive, as sunlight pierced the high, slow-moving clouds and a crow cawed from the house's eave. Maybe he was hiding something at Cade's? Would he dare mess with a cop's instincts and leave anything under his father's nose? No, primarily because whatever it was wouldn't be handy. This business with Dylan was bad, but she sensed there was a lot more going on with her daughter. Harper was 17, nearly on her own. Rachel felt worse about searching through her things, but did anyway, in both Harper's bedroom and bathroom. She didn't find anything unexpected. No weed, no cigarettes, no hidden half-drunk bottle of booze, no unexplained stash of money, no contraceptives, which, considering how things were playing out, might not be such a bad idea. So they were destined to have one of those mother-child talks both kids hated once they got home. In the meantime, she had a website to update and a job search to continue. She walked to the kitchen to grab her phone, and just as she was about to grab it from its charger, it started vibrating on the counter. She picked it up and noticed the phone number on the small display was unfamiliar, no name attached to it. She thought of the text she'd received, but that was a different cell number completely. She knew. She'd memorized the digits. "Hello?" "Hi, this is Rachel, right? Rachel Ryder?" a woman asked, then didn't wait for an answer. "I thought I should call you." "Sorry, who is this?" "Oh, my, it's Ella Dickerson from across the street, Jim's wife." Rachel's heart sank as she pictured her neighbor. A white-haired woman pushing 80 who was always working in her yard and complaining about one thing or another. There was her arthritis, her children, or her husband, whose latest offense, or at least the most recent one Rachel had heard about, was purchasing a 72-inch flat screen. "To watch more sports, if you can imagine. I swear, they're on 24/7. Ella was the neighborhood busybody who knew everything about everybody on the street. "Your front door," Ella was explaining. "I mean, have you seen it? Oh, dear, you'd best take a look. I assume it was vandalized, and I thought you should know if you hadn't seen it. But if you have, then—" "What are you talking about?" Rachel asked, already walking through the house. "I was afraid you hadn't seen it. I said so to Jim. I saw it when I went to pick up the paper this morning. I told Jim that you couldn't possibly know." "I don't get what you mean." Rachel unbolted the door and flung it open to find out what the nosy neighbor was talking about. She took one step onto the porch, then stopped, her heart plummeting as she saw the single word scrawled in red paint on her black door. Killer. Chapter 17. Cade pushed the speed limit on his way to Rachel's house. When she'd called, he'd immediately heard the strain in her voice, the edge to it. "I think you'd better come over here." She'd sounded wound tight. "Why?" "Just come, Cade. Are you working today? Can you come now?" "On my way." He didn't like the way she sounded. At her house, he caught sight of Rachel standing on the porch by the front door, an ugly message painted on the panels behind her. "Oh, Jesus." He parked on the street and jogged up the walkway, aware that the neighbors across the way, an older couple, were in their yard watching the drama unfold. Cade eyed the door and his insides clenched. "What happened?" "I don't know. I didn't see it until the neighbors called.
I didn't notice it when I went for a run this morning, but you know when I leave the house, I go in and out through the back door. Anyway, Mrs. Dickerson called to tell me something was up, and I came outside and found this. Painted in a crimson shade that made him think of blood, the message was like a shriek in a horror film. Killer. Rachel was ashen-faced, but holding it together. I was going to start painting over it, but I thought I should call someone. You were right. He was already whipping out his phone and tamping down his fury. Vandalism is a crime, not a prank, but I think someone other than your ex should take the report. He made the call, and Voss, who was on duty and in the area, promised to be at the house within 10 minutes. Officer Voss is on her way, he told Rachel as he stuffed his phone into his pocket and eyed the vandalized door. So, this happened last night? He said, pointing at the entrance to the house. I think so. He glanced across the street and saw the Dickersons hadn't left their stations in their yard. Standing side by side on the other side of a short wrought iron fence, guarding a row of azaleas and rhododendrons, she in a long housecoat, he in a t-shirt and jeans, held up by suspenders, they watched the drama unfold. Rachel, obviously aware of the Dickersons, and now a bike rider doing a double-take as he saw the door, touched him on the arm. Maybe you should come inside. Once they were in the hallway, where Reno greeted him, and the door with its ugly message pulled firmly shut, he said, So tell me. The long and short of it is that I had a bad dream about Luke. Of course. He didn't say it. But that's not the worst of it. Meaning? Odd things have been happening. I keep hearing things, seeing things, and it's not just me. Reno does too, she said, amping up a bit. And I received a weird text. I mean, it was as if Luke had sent it. I know that's impossible. Crazy. But here, let me show you. She patted the back pocket of her jeans and then frowned. I guess I left it. She walked quickly down the hallway and into the kitchen, and he followed. Here. After retrieving her cell from the counter, she studied the screen, punched out some commands, found what she was looking for, and handed the phone to him. I forgive you. He read the text aloud, his insides chilling. He glanced up at her. Who sent it? Don't know. I tried to text and call back. No one responded. Could be a mistake, sent to the wrong number. But he didn't believe it for a second, not with the message, the vile accusation sprayed across the door. I don't think so. She glanced out the window. I should tell you I saw something last night. What? Real or imagined? The doorbell sounded, and the dog started barking. Patricia Voss had arrived. Good. He wanted to hear it all, but thought it would be best if someone else heard the story. Someone with a little distance. Someone who hadn't spent nights beside her in bed as Rachel woke with night terrors. Someone who hadn't had to calm their children when their mother was half-crazed with fear. Someone objective and professional. Reno, hush! Rachel opened the door. Quick introductions were made, and Voss set up a recorder to take Rachel's statement. They were in the living room, where the clock ticked over the fireplace, nearly buried in the framed pictures of Harper and Dylan crowded upon the mantel. Cade felt an uncomfortable pull, remembering when some of the photographs had been taken. Christmas, when the kids were just starting elementary school, Harper missing teeth, Dylan sporting a buzz cut that Rachel had hated. He stood near the couch where Rachel sat, Voss in a winged-back chair at one end of the coffee table, the dog finding a spot on the corner of the rug. You have any idea who would have done this? Voss asked, her pen poised to take notes to back up the recording. Rachel shook her head. No, but I think maybe I saw him. Him? A man? Voss asked, and Cade felt his jaw tense. It was last night. Well, around 3 in the morning. She explained about having a bad dream,
being awakened by the dog's barking. Downstairs, she'd look through the windows and the door to see a man and a dog getting into a car at the end of the street. "A dog?" Cade repeated, feeling a jolt. "Can you describe the man?" Voss asked. "No, it was too dark. He looked average, I guess, and he was carrying something. And like I said, he was walking his dog." "What kind of car?" Cade asked, already guessing. "Don't know, just what looked like a white or maybe silver sedan." He pressed her. "You get the plate number or notice if it was from Oregon?" "No." Of course not, but his mind was spinning ahead. "And the dog, what kind was it? What breed?" "I couldn't say. Small or medium-sized, I guess, and light-colored." "Could it have been a beagle?" She lifted a shoulder. "Again, it was dark, but maybe. About that size." "You know anyone named Frank Quinn?" Cade asked. "What?" She looked up at him. Her lips turned into a frown as she slowly shook her head. "No." "He lives on Toulouse Street," Cade said. "I said I don't know him. Why?" "The other day, when I came over." He explained about the guy looking for his dog, a man who drove a white four-door sedan with Idaho plates, and as he spoke, he noticed the panic starting to rise in his ex-wife's eyes. "I have no idea who he is," she said. "You think he's the same person?" "Maybe." He kicked himself for not delving deeper into Frank Quinn. "Tell Voss about the text." "What text?" Voss asked. "This one." Rachel found her phone and handed it to Voss. "I forgive you? From who?" "That's it. I have no idea." Rachel repeated to Voss what she'd already told Cade, including explaining that she'd tried to contact the caller by phoning and texting back with no response. Pushing her hair out of her eyes, she sighed. "It came on the anniversary of my brother's death, 20 years ago." "I read about what happened in the paper." Voss's eyes narrowed. "So you think whoever called you is forgiving you for being involved in his death?" "I don't know." Voss pressed. "Who would need to forgive you? Someone who thought you were guilty, right?" Rachel's face tightened. "I guess." "Who?" "I don't know." Rachel looked away. "I mean, Luke's dead, so it can't be him." She didn't seem convinced. "Of course not," Cade said. "I know, but I had this feeling. I don't know, it sounds crazy, but that someone wants me to believe it's him." "It wasn't Luke," he said firmly. She couldn't go down that impossible track. "I know." Her voice was a little sharp, defensive. Though it had been 20 years, she'd never really gotten over her half-brother's death. She'd always blamed herself. "It's probably someone who took Luke's death personally," Voss thought aloud as she underlined something in her notes. "Someone close to him?" Immediately, Cade thought of Lila, good old stepmommy, mother of Luke's son. But why? Yeah, there had been some tension between Lila and Rachel over the years, family stuff, but nothing that would lead to this. And why now? No. "We'll check with the cell phone company," Voss was saying. "If it was accidental, which I doubt, or if it was some kind of a sick prank, we'll figure it out. But if it's a burner phone..." Cade wasn't liking the turn of his thoughts. He wasn't buying into the mistake theory, especially not with the grotesque message spray-painted on the door. Someone was trying to freak Rachel out, and he thought it might just be Frank Quinn. "You know the drill. If it's a burner, we'll try to track it down from the store where it was purchased. If there's no record of who bought it, no credit or debit card receipt or check if the guy used cash, hopefully there will be camera footage of the buyer. And we will double-check all the security cameras in the area that might have images of the man and his dog." "What if it's a burner app?" Rachel asked. "You can do that, you know. There are apps that disguise your number, make it impossible to trace." Cade had heard of them. "There has to be some kind of trail, digitally." Rachel shook her head. I think everything can be encrypted.
I'll dig deeper on Frank Quinn. Find out if he lives in the neighborhood or owns a Buick with Idaho plates,
Cade said. Again he thought of Violet Sperry, murdered in her own home, and his blood turned cold. Was there a connection? Voss said, Didn't I see a camera on the porch? Not working, Rachel admitted. Cade winced inside. He should have dealt with it when he still lived here. It's old school, Rachel said. Put in by the people who owned the house before we did over 20 years ago. It wasn't working, always going off, so I canceled the service and was going to install a new one connected to an app on my phone. She smiled weakly. I just hadn't gotten around to it. Voss gave a curt nod.
You might want to make that a priority. Amen to that, Cade thought.
They went through a few more questions, and the tech came, dusted for prints, and left, with Voss taking off a few minutes later.
Which left him alone with his ex-wife, in the living room they'd once shared. It felt right, but different. Odd. She hadn't changed the room much other than painting it a lighter color, a neutral gray, rather than the tan it had been. She'd also filled the space where his recliner had sat with a smaller chair. You okay? He asked.
Do I look okay?
No. You look like
hell, I know. I look like hell.
You don't.
I do.
Crap.
She raked her fingers through her hair and stood. You know, ever since Luke died, I've had these nightmares.
Yeah.
He was nodding, had lived through them. And I've always told myself to somehow put it behind me. That what's done is done, to move on. And I've tried. But this Mercy, dredging everything up again in the paper, and the reunion meeting with all the people who were there that night, and now this? She held up her phone, then pointed to her door. It's freaky.
You're right, and I don't like it.
And then there's Violet. Shuddering, she sat down again and tucked her feet under her. Is there any news about what happened to her?
Not that I know of.
Well, it's disturbing. Worse than disturbing. She was rubbing her arms as if suddenly chilled.
I know,
he said. I'm afraid it makes me like a crazy, overprotective mother. He slanted a smile and took the chair Voss had vacated so he could look out the window to the Dickersons' now empty yard.
The kids might agree with that.
Do you think it's true? She asked, and turned her eyes up to him as Reno stood, stretched, then wandered toward the back of the house.
Crazy? No. Overprotective?
He held up his hand, then tilted it.
Sometimes, a little.
But even as he said it, he thought again about Violet Sperry and her bizarre death. There was probably no connection to what was going on here. God, he hoped not, but he didn't want to just dismiss the thought.
We all need to be careful.
He didn't want to alarm her, send her over the edge, but he couldn't pretend that the Sperry murder wasn't cause for serious concern. The last thing I want to be is overprotective. After growing up with my own parents. She rolled her eyes. I swore I'd never be the hovering, nosy parent my mother was, and as for my dad, I saw what being married to a cop was like, how he wasn't home for a lot of the holidays or major events. He felt his insides turn to stone. How smart had his own choices been, he wondered.
Sometimes history repeats itself, the choices we make.
There was a bit of a hesitation before she said, Then I guess I should make better ones.
Maybe we both should.
She stared at him a sec, then changed the subject. How was your weekend with the kids? We all left on bad terms Friday night. I wasn't happy with either of them. Dylan because of him ditching class, and Harper because of, the new boy or man or whatever in her life.
Dylan's been fine. If it bothers him that he's in trouble at school, he doesn't show it and won't talk about it.
Harper says you blew things all out of proportion, that she was just kissing Xander, and that she's... Let me get this straight. He thought for a second. Oh, I remember. Same old line I said way back when. Harper claimed that she was almost 18, and when she turned 18, she could do whatever she wanted. Like 18 changes everything. The magic, now I'm an adult card. She smiled. She'll find out. But I can't push back too hard against this boy because it'll just drive her further into his arms. Ugh. She wants to go to a concert with him in Portland next weekend, Saturday night. Rachel let out a sigh. No. Why not? It's 2 hours away for starters. She's gone before. But we've known the kids, the parents. Lila vouches for him. Since when do you trust Lila's judgment? Okay, point taken. But Harper's 17. She'll be 18 in October. Which she so often reminds us. Off to college. Not until next year, Rachel said, then skewered him with a glare. You're promoting this? I can't believe it. He might not be so bad. I figure you've probably already checked him out online, looked into his social media accounts. She ducked that one. It's not about bad or good, Cade. You know that. We've been over it before. I just don't want her to make a mistake she can't unmake. Like you. It was different. I wanted to marry you. I wanted your baby. It just came in the wrong order. Is that so bad? She folded her arms and stared at him. I want my daughter to have more options. And it's not like she's in love with Xander Vale. They're just in lust, hot for each other. She crossed her arms under her breasts in anger, unaware that she was lifting them. I just hope they think before they act. Harper's not an idiot. Neither was I, except when it came to you. He let out a derisive laugh. Me too. You know, she's texting all the time, and when I ask her about it, she's always texting a friend, or she'll cop to communicating with Lucas, but I'm pretty sure it's Vale. When has she ever texted Lucas? They were pretty tight as kids, he reminded her. Back in the days when he and Rachel were still married and Lila and Rachel had been close. Since the divorce, things had changed for all of them. And now she's got a renewed relationship with him? Looks like. Because of Xander Vale. Probably. You remember how it was when we were in lust and hot for each other? She actually blushed. As I said, options, like college, so she can get a bigger view of the world than just from Edgewater, Oregon. It wasn't the worst thing that happened to me. Okay, I'll admit it. Having Harper and marrying you, ending up with Dylan, I wouldn't change a thing. Well, not most things anyway. She looked away, no doubt thinking about his betrayal. And then, as if the conversation had gotten too deep, she waved in the air as if to dismiss her words. So, look, don't worry about the door, okay? I'll deal with it, she said, with more resolve than he'd seen in her in a long while. I panicked after Ella called, but I'm okay now. She glanced at the door. Nothing a can of spray paint can't cover up until I can paint the whole thing. I was thinking of changing the color anyway. And the security alarm? Our son owes me, and he's got the skills, I think. Maybe even the equipment. He withdrew his keys from his pocket. Any kind of guard dog? He asked. Reno. She let out a humorless laugh, and the dog, hearing his name, wagged his tail, then circumvented the coffee table to stand next to Rachel and place his head on her lap. She scratched him behind the ears. Not much of one. Maybe you should upgrade. Yeah, right. To the dog, she said, Don't listen to that. He's just kidding. His phone buzzed in his pocket and he checked the screen. A text from the precinct. The job, he said to her, standing. The boss wants me in early. Then you'd better go,
You'll be okay?
Never better, she said, though they both knew it was a lie.
I can come back, help clean up the door. I've painted a few panels in my day.
No, I've got this, she said firmly as she stood. You need to get to work.
Forget work.
He paused, knowing she wanted to handle things herself. It was her thing.
I've got time coming. I have no problem calling in.
No, I'll be fine. She flashed him one of her rare smiles, and her gold eyes gleamed for a second. Remember, I've got Reno.
Guard dog less than extraordinaire.
Exactly. He didn't like it, but saw she couldn't be moved.
Okay, fine. But I'll be by to make sure the security system is online.
Really, Cade, you don't need to do this.
Yeah, I think I do,
he said, and decided to be brutally honest.
My kids live here with my ex-wife, and contrary to what she may believe, I care about her, want her safe.
Rachel drew in a long breath.
Oh, I don't care what you think, Rach. It's the truth.
She looked about to argue again, so he started for the door.
In the meantime, keep the dog on alert and the doors and windows locked.
Chapter 18. Dylan was sweating bullets. His knee was twitching and he kept glancing at the clock, ticking off the seconds of the school day, maybe of his life. His mom was on to him. He saw her poking around his room this morning, finding his stash. Shit. 10 minutes left in class. Then he'd have to avoid that moron Schmidt and his goons, then deal with a smug assistant principal. He felt as if the walls were closing in on him, that he had nowhere to turn, no one to confide in. Dylan. Tori Suzuki's voice brought him back to the present, at his terminal in the library media room, where he and the rest of the class were supposed to be finishing their English essays. He looked up and caught her smiling at him from the next computer terminal. Sorry to bother you, but... Dylan's heart jolted. When Tori smiled at him, with her dark eyes and pretty face framed by shiny black hair, he could barely concentrate. She had a boyfriend, so he didn't think she was actually flirting with him, but she always sat next to Dylan if they were in the media room during second period, and he was good with that.
What?
He asked, keeping his voice low so the library monitor wouldn't pounce on them. Exams were proctored, but since it was harder to cheat on an essay, no one watched too closely. I was wondering if you could show me that trick you know to make your essay look a little bit longer without changing the margins. He got it. If the essay wasn't 5 pages, you couldn't get an A, and it was easy enough to put all the punctuation in 13-point type for starters. He had a few other tricks as well.
Sure.
She leaned in, so close he could smell her perfume. He tried not to notice. He couldn't get distracted by anything, not even Tori. He swallowed hard. You think you could set it up for me? She whispered.
Sure,
he said again, as if it were the only word he knew. Girls like Tori made him nervous, even nice girls who already had a boyfriend. He shot a glance over his shoulder to see if anyone was paying attention. Nah. Holding his breath, he leaned over to her keyboard and opened the systems file. A few changes, probably less than 60 seconds, and he was done.
Try it that way.
She opened her file, scrolled through it, and flashed him a bright smile. Wow, perfect. It's 5 pages now. That's amazing. Dylan nodded. Thank you so much. You're so good at that. She paused for a second, then whispered, Hey, is it true what they're saying about your mom?
My mom?
Where was this going? You know, what was in the paper that she was arrested for murder. Her almond eyes rounded a bit, and he felt cold inside. And it's online. He knew. He'd already read it himself, but the article was pretty straightforward, just gave the facts on a homicide that was as old as dirt. So Tori was suddenly interested in him so that he could help her do her homework, and because his mother was some kind of psycho or something, possibly a killer? Suddenly he looked like some kind of bad boy? Edgy? Really? She didn't kill anybody, he said under his breath, and felt heat crawling up the back of his neck. I know, but wow, arrested for murder. Can you imagine? No, he felt suddenly defensive. It's kind of, don't say cool. Interesting. She flashed him another smile. He'd known about the article and had wondered if it might be a big deal here at Edgewater High, but Tori was the first to bring it up to him. If anyone had read it or cared, he hadn't heard about it. Until now. If you say so. At least you can say your mom's not boring. Tori picked up her things. My mom's an actuary. Ugh. She rolled those incredible eyes, then pulled her phone from her pocket, studied the screen, and didn't look back at him as the tone sounded, signifying the end of class and the end of the day. He grabbed his backpack, keeping with the mob of students. It was too bad that he couldn't even think that she might like him just a little, if only for the wrong reasons. Slipping into the hallway and losing himself in the throng of teenagers walking, shouting, laughing, and banging lockers, he felt a little niggle of pride. She was right, though. He might not be good at a lot of things, but he understood computers inside and out. He had mad skills, but word was getting around. She wasn't the first kid to ask for his help, and that wasn't good. He had to keep a low profile, not show off, now more than ever since Walsh was on his case. He was scheduled to meet with her right after school. In the hallway, he skirted the area near his locker and kept up with a group of kids heading toward the main doors near the admin offices. He kept looking over his shoulder for Schmidt, but he was nowhere to be seen. Good. As long as Dylan kept with large groups, he should be safe. Maybe. The secretary waved him into Mrs. Walsh's office. She'll be right back. She told me to let you go on in. He stepped into the small room and wondered how long she'd be gone, if he had time to. With a quick look over his shoulder, he saw the receptionist was busy at the counter. Before he could talk himself out of it, he shoved the door so that it was barely open, just a crack, then moved around the desk. Not bothering to sit, he pushed back the chair, leaned over the keyboard, and checked Walsh's computer terminal. Of course it wouldn't open. He needed a password. The screensaver, a picture of the front of the high school, stayed in place, mocking him. Softly, hardly daring to breathe, he pulled open her drawer, searching for a card or something where she might have jotted a note. On first sweep, nothing. He swept his gaze across the flat surface of the desk, even picked up a picture and checked the back, anywhere she might keep her password. No hint in the drawers. Nothing on her neat desk. He was really sweating now. He didn't have much time. If he could figure it out, come on. The picture of her daughter. God, what was that girl's name? Bethany, Brittany. She was a few years older than Harper, had graduated the year before he'd become a freshman, so she was like 19, maybe? He tried a combination of each of the names, backward and forward, with each of the 2 years when the daughter might have been born. Nothing. He bit his lip, thought hard. Felt the sweat bead on his forehead. Come on, Ryder, think you can do this? Glancing up, he saw the girl at the counter gathering her things. Crap! The receptionist was about to return to her desk and might peek inside and catch him. His heart was racing. Calm down. Only a few more seconds. If he knew more about Marlene Walsh, like her husband's name, or if they had a pet, or the year Walsh herself had been born or graduated from high school or college, he needed more information to get in. Not that it was that big a deal. He knew he could hack into the school system. It wasn't that tough. But it would be so great to be able to log on as if he were the friggin' vice principal. That would give him a sense of satisfaction. Kind of a behind her back, but also in her face move. Major bragging rights, and footsteps clicked outside the door. His heart nearly stopped. Crap! He looked up. The receptionist was turning back to her desk. He scrambled back to the chair behind the door just as it swept open, yanked his phone from his back pocket, and pretended to be texting. Dylan. Marlene Walsh smiled that same plastic grin she used when addressing the student body in one of her stupid rah-rah Edgewater Eagles speeches that made him groan. So phony. Sorry I'm late. No prob. He actually stood, something his dad had taught him a long time ago. Sit, sit. Waving him back to his chair, she swept around the desk and stopped on the far side to eye her chair. Jesus, he'd forgotten to push it back under the desk. Her neatly plucked brows puckered as she sat, scooting it closer to the computer monitor. She knows. She can feel you were there. He tried to keep cool as she adjusted her reading glasses onto her nose and typed quickly onto her keyboard, Beth 2018 Ann. At least, that's what it looked like. That was her daughter's name, Beth Ann. Now he remembered. And if the school required her to change the password every so often, he bet she just put in a different year or something and kept the letters the same. 2018. The year after Beth Ann had graduated, who knew? And really, who cared? She pressed her palms to the desktop. How long have you been waiting? He lifted a shoulder, attempting to appear bored. I don't know. Maybe a minute or so. She didn't believe him, but she kept typing, and now he could feel his shirt sticking to his back. Okay, let's see. I've been going over your records. She glanced at him. Not attendance, we've been through that, but performance. He felt a little tingle of dread raise the hairs on the back of his neck. What was this all about? She eyed the screen, as if studying it for the first time. But Dylan figured this might be for show, that she already knew what she was going to say. Since you started at Edgewater High last year, your grades have slowly declined. So what else was new? But your test scores, not at all. They're above grade level, especially in math and computer science. Her eyebrows knit over her glasses, and her mouth turned down. Another practiced look. In fact, your schoolwork doesn't come anywhere close to where your tests indicate you should be. She looked at him, and he lifted a shoulder again. He got it. She was saying he was a slacker. Turning away from the monitor, she leaned across the desk. You know, Dylan, you have tremendous potential. Yeah, he'd heard it all before. In fact, Mr. Tallarico has requested you to be his TA in computer science next year. That's a spot usually reserved for a senior. She paused, waiting for a reaction, but he just slouched in his chair. So, why the disparity? She asked, though he thought it was a rhetorical question. She really didn't expect him to answer, and he didn't. Leaning back, she asked, How are things going here, at school? Okay. No problem with friends, other than with Mr. Schmidt? Yeah, fine. What about at home? What? You live with your mother. Not a question. So here it was, the big D word. His parents were divorced, which wasn't a big deal. Lots of his friends' parents had split up. Most of the time, yeah. He looked up and held her gaze. But you see your dad? Another too kind smile. Oh, yeah. She frowned a little. Everything okay at home? Yeah. He said it with a little more enthusiasm. What was she getting at? He added, We're good. Real good. She waited a few seconds, then pushed herself to standing. Okay then, but just so you know, you can always talk to me or Miss Lindley. The school psychologist? Oh, geez. Don't need to, he said, feeling his back muscles tighten. Fine, just as long as you know. Now, maybe you can help us sort out the mess with the security cameras. As I understand it, the problem lies in storage of the data on the computer. Mr. Tallarico has already started looking at it. Oh, so he wasn't on his own. No surprise, but too bad. He would love to have some time alone with the school security system. As Mrs. Walsh rounded the corner of her desk, He noticed for the first time the newspaper folded neatly near her in-basket. Suddenly, he understood. She'd read the article about his uncle being murdered, about his mom being charged, just like Tori Suzuki. Great. Of course the vice principal would think it messed him up. That's why she brought up the school psychologist. As if that was ever going to happen. No friggin' way. Patient. I lied. I lied to everyone. Therapist. That night? Patient. Yes, and now. I'm lying to them now. To my friends. To Luke. Therapist. Tell me. Patient, worried. I've never told anyone. I've tried, but I can't, I still can't. Therapist. Let's go back to that night in the processing plant. Patient. I don't want to. Therapist. It's your decision. Patient, voice tremulous. Okay, I will. A pause. The patient visibly shudders. I'm here now. In the cannery. It's dark. So dark. I think I smell fish. No, just the river. Wet. Dank. The patient concentrates, eyebrows knitting. People are here, but I can't see them. Just hear them. Lots of them. Guns going off and firecrackers. Someone's laughing, but I'm scared. Luke, I need to find Luke before it's too late. Therapist. Too late for what? Patient. Before someone else finds out. Therapist. Finds out what? Patient, frustrated, voice cracking. About my lies. To him. To my parents, to my friends, to everyone, but mainly to him. Therapist. Where are you? In the building. Patient. I'm walking. My gun in my hand, but it's dark. So dark. I can't see. People are running. People are laughing. I hear someone climbing the ladder, the rungs ringing, and then I shoot. Therapist. And then what? Patient, agitated, eyes wide, nearly frantic. And then Luke falls. He's been hit. There's blood everywhere. Oh my God, he can't die. He can't. I need to talk to him. I need to explain. I have to save him. Therapist. And can you? Patient, in a panic. No, there's too much blood. Luke. Therapist. Let's come back now. Patient, determined. No, I can't leave him. I won't. Therapist. It's time. You're returning. Patient. No, Luke, please. Therapist, taking control. You're surfacing. Patient. Luke, oh God, Luke, forgive me. Therapist, more firmly. You are leaving the cannery, and Luke, for now. The therapist hides frustration and keeps a steady voice. On my count. Patient, taking short breaths, nearly hyperventilating. But, therapist, rock steady. 3. And you're leaving the building, going away from the riverfront and Luke, and leaving the past behind. Patient, still frantic. I don't know. I could save him. Therapist, in control. 2. And you're nearly awake. Patient. There's so much to tell him. The patient's still worried, but coming around. Therapist. 1. The patient's eyes open and blink, adjusting to the soft lighting and soothing music in the tiny room. A bit of incense tinges the air with oleander as the patient stirs and focuses on the therapist. Therapist, smiling with relief, voice soft and steady. And you're back. Patient, breathless, still worried. I couldn't tell him. I didn't get the chance. Therapist, you will. Maybe in the next session. Patient, sighing. Maybe, but I've been living with this for so long. Therapist, it takes time. Patient, wryly. And time wounds all heals, isn't that what they say? Well, this wound, this pain has been around too long. It needs to go away. Therapist, taking a peek at the clock on the antique desk. It will. The leather of the recliner creaks as the patient adjusts the chair to a sitting position. I hope so. the patient stands. God, I hope so. Chapter 19. Over the years, Rachel had learned that she had to pick her moments. So she waited until both of the kids were home from school Monday evening. Dinner was in the oven. Lasagna. The security system had been reconnected, and they were settling in for homework. Dylan hadn't said much about his extra time at the school doing Mrs. Walsh's bidding, just that it was okay. And Harper had spent a couple of hours working on some project at a friend's house, supposedly studying. Neither kid had asked Rachel how her day had gone, though if they had, she wouldn't have told them about the front door. The new coat of black paint had dried, and she figured that threat could wait for another day. Now, though, it was time for the truth about what her son had been up to. Harper was already on her phone in her room, the door only slightly ajar, and Dylan was heading to his when she stopped him. "We need to talk," she said. "In the living room." "About what?" He didn't seem surprised and didn't argue, just walked down the hall in his bare feet. "This." She pulled the sock with the money out of her pocket and noticed his jaw tense. Not surprise. Anger. She thought he would be shocked, and he definitely wasn't. "Sit." He dropped onto a corner of the couch. "Want to explain?" she asked. "No." Rebellion flared in his eyes. "Well, you're going to, or I'm going to expect the worst." She emptied the sock and dropped it and the damning bills onto the coffee table. "Talk." "Geez, Mom, it's not what you think." "Which is?" "That I'm selling drugs, right? Isn't that what you think? Why you brought up the Xanax?" He rolled his eyes. "I'm not that stupid." She resisted asking, "And just how stupid are you?" Instead, she said, as she sat in a nearby chair, "Convince me." He hesitated, looked out the window, and sighed through his nose as Reno trotted into the room to take his spot in the bed near the fireplace. "You said you were broke, that you needed money to pay off the kid that was hassling you?" "Schmidt," Dylan supplied. "Right. You borrowed $100 from me because you owed him some gambling debt." For emphasis, she made air quotes. "Yeah, and I'm paying it back. Geez, Mom, didn't I help you with the security system? Didn't I say I'd mow the lawn and do whatever stupid job you have?" "But you already had money. More than enough. This money." She pointed a finger at the uneven pile of small bills. "Where'd you get it? And don't even say anything about saving it from your birthday or whatever. Everything you take in goes to some kind of equipment for either your computer or your game system or something. It's my business." "And mine." Trying to cool off a little, she said, "So what's going on, Dylan? What are you into?" "Not drugs!" he yelled. Then, more calmly, "Okay?" "Then what? And don't try to convince me that you're into some online betting because I'm just not buying it." Arms folded, foot bouncing nervously, he didn't answer. "I'm not the enemy, you know," she said. "Then why are you acting like it, interrogating me?" "Because I'm scared, Dylan. You're doing something behind my back, something you don't want to talk about, something you want to keep hidden. So I'm worried that you're in trouble." "I'm not." She hadn't heard Harper come out of her room, nor walk down the hall, but she showed up and stood half in the hallway, half in the living room. "Tell her," Harper said, staring at her brother. "What?" He was shaking his head, his eyes round. "Tell her that you help kids on the side, you know, with computer stuff." She was staring directly at her brother. "Admit that you're a geek, probably the best one in school." Dylan was as white as a sheet. "So you do what you did this afternoon for Mom or for Mr. Talarico after school. You fix computers and kinds of electronic stuff for other kids." She came into the room, stood near the fireplace. "But..." "Tell her or I will," Harper said. her gaze still firmly holding his. "Well, fine," she said, and finally turned her attention to Rachel. "He's kind of got this side business going. It's not that big of a deal, but word is getting around, and he helps kids get their gaming systems or computers or whatever working again." This didn't sound right. "He's done stuff for me with my phone when I couldn't figure out an app, and he's helped Lucas and Xander and my friend Julie, lots of kids." She waved a hand as if to include the entire student body of Edgewater High. "Sometimes it's behind the parents' backs, like a kid got a cell phone from a friend or whatever." "Stolen." "No!" She shook her head fiercely. Dylan was in quick agreement. Rachel was trying to piece it all together. "Is that why the Schmidt kid was on your case?" Dylan nodded, glancing at his sister as if she would back him up. "How?" Rachel asked. "Something I did for him didn't work, and he wanted me to fix it right then and there, so I cut class and met him, but I didn't have all the right equipment. I wanted to bring it home, and he was pissed off, mad at me, said he'd already paid, and so..." "But why wouldn't you tell me?" "Because you freak out about everything. Everything. You're a walking basket case." Rachel protested. "I'm not. Seriously, Mom," Harper said. "It's like we can't tell you anything, or you'll go all weird and hyper and suspicious." "Is that true?" Rachel said, turning to her son. Beyond him, through the window, she saw Ella Dickerson in her yard, down on her hands and knees, pulling weeds. "Am I that bad?" Dylan swallowed and glanced at his sister before meeting his mother's eyes. "We just don't want to, upset you." She wasn't certain she was getting all of the truth, and she was suspicious that they'd somehow both worked together, double-teamed her with the story, but part of it was right. "We hear you, Mom," Harper said softly, and for the first time since she'd entered the conversation, her daughter seemed totally sincere. "At night, when you have those dreams, we hear you walk around, talk to yourself, even scream sometimes." Her heart sank. The last thing she wanted to do, the very last, was worry her children. "It's not your fault," Harper was quick to add. We know that, but it's scary." "Yeah," her son put in. "Kind of freaky, Mom." Her heart squeezed painfully. "Oh, God, I don't want to ever..." Rachel felt horrible and wanted to apologize all over the place, but she couldn't help but wonder how this conversation had turned around, to the point where, instead of dealing with Dylan's obvious lies, she was now feeling as if she'd failed as a mother. She looked from daughter to son. For once, they seemed absolutely sincere. Still, she was suspicious. Even now, they might be hiding something. But what? "Okay, well..." She slapped her hands onto her thighs, then stood. "This has been enlightening, and maybe we should all work on being more truthful." "And calm," Harper suggested. "Yeah, that too." Rachel felt that this would be a group hug moment if her life were a television sitcom or drama, but as it was, Dylan said, "Can I go now?" "Yeah, but no more secrets and no more cutting class. You can set up something here or meet kids before or after school." "Okay, but can I have my money back?" he asked. "Yes, sure, it's yours," she said. "Except for the $100 you owe me, right?" "Right," he said, scooping up his money and heading to his room. "Thanks," she said to her daughter, but didn't feel the relief she'd anticipated. Harper nodded. "You're welcome, but Mom, really, don't go through my room again, okay? And don't tell me you didn't, 'cause I know you did. I can tell. Besides, we're not having any more secrets, right?" "Right. And going through my things, that's like illegal, right? An invasion of privacy or something?" "Not illegal." Rachel shook her head and tightened the band that was holding her hair away from her face. But next time, I'll let you know. No, not another next time. I need my own space. I'm almost 18. I know. And from that point on, you think you'll be totally independent, but you'll still be living with me. Or Dad. I could live with him. Harper elevated her chin just a fraction. Rachel's heart twisted, but she hid it. Yeah, that's always an option. Or get an apartment. A little more defiance. You think you could afford one? With a roommate? Uh-oh, where was this going? A roommate like Xander Vale? Rachel didn't go there. No reason to give Harper any ideas that she might not have come up with on her own. And you'd need a job, maybe 2 jobs, to make ends meet on top of juggling school, so you should probably wait. It's a lot cheaper here. But it's like I live in a prison. Harper flung out her arms dramatically. You won't even let me go to a concert because you don't like Xander. I don't know him. Exactly. She reached into her pocket, read a text on her phone screen, and repeated, a prison. Rachel gave her a you've got to be kidding look. She couldn't wait until Harper was living on her own and learning the real lessons in life, but not yet. She was still so young, naive in so many ways. So she said, you're right. It's a prison and I'm the warden. You know what I mean. She actually looked up from the screen. Yeah, I do. I remember saying the same thing to my mother, and I'll give you the same advice she gave me. Deal with it. He was late. Again. Anessa walked through the old school with its unused classrooms, forgotten hallways, and dirty windows, many of which had long been boarded up. St. Augustine's Elementary, once filled with laughter, shouts, and running feet, was now quiet, deathly quiet, empty and cold, smelling of disuse. Her husband, Clint Cooper, had bought the place, along with other properties in town. Since she'd moved back to Edgewater to deal with her ailing parents, he'd thought it would make her happy to purchase some of the historic places around the area, to revitalize a town that had suffered with the times. To that end, Clint had purchased a farm outside of Astoria, a sawmill not far from Astoria, the old cannery on the waterfront, and St. Augustine's, which consisted of this school, a small church, and an attached hospital. Let's make Edgewater a destination, you know, Clint had said, thinking he would please her. We can turn the old school into a hotel, the chapel, a restaurant, and, maybe, condos in the hospital. He'd been on the deck of their penthouse, smoking a cigar, the lights of Seattle shining a bright backdrop. As he told her about his plan, he'd grown enthusiastic. How about refurbishing the Seaview Cannery into a mall, loaded with quaint shops, condos too, being as it's on the river, great views, fantastic wildlife? I know the building would have to be raised, but we can go off the footprint, make people think it's just as it was, the history of it all, the jobs it created, and then there's that murder that took place. Adds to the mystique, you know. I was there, she'd reminded her husband, who was drawing on his cigar, the tip glowing, smoke coiling over his balding head. No mystique. It's horrible. People like horror. And off he'd gone, dreaming of building something unique. What he didn't realize was that she didn't care about Edgewater. So the town was dying, so what? Yeah, she'd go back, look after Dad now that Mom had passed, but it was temporary. Or that had been the plan. Her plan. But where she'd seen duty, her husband had glimpsed opportunity. A mistake. And being here now, in the old school, was a little unnerving. She walked into what had been a bathroom for primary students, with its low sink and row of stalls. Girls' bathroom, she thought. No stained urinals, still hugging the walls. She caught sight of her reflection in the dusty, cracked mirror. Tall and slim, her hair glossy and almost black, Her eyes, with the aid of colored contacts and intense turquoise, still attractive, even wealthier than she had once been, far wealthier, and lonely as hell. No children. Grown stepchildren and young step-grandchildren who didn't know her and didn't care to. An aging lion of a husband who cared more about his latest golf score, his next development, and the figures in his bank accounts than his trophy wife. Clint just had never got her. Didn't understand. Never would. 32 years was a hell of a age difference. For God's sake, she was avoiding her 20th high school reunion, and he was collecting Social Security. A thought that hadn't occurred to her 15 years ago, when she'd been swayed by his money, and Clint, at 55, had still been dashing, trim, and worldly, and it had all been a load of crap. So here she was, waiting for a lover who didn't care any more for her than her husband did. Disgusted with herself, she heard the steady drip, drip, drip of a pipe that hadn't quite been turned off, and she walked into the hallway again, remembering wearing uniforms and running out to the play yard, where there had been a covered area, a tetherball pole, 4 square courts, and a few pieces of aging and probably unsafe equipment. Now, as she peered through a locked door, she saw only rubble in the open area where she'd once screamed and laughed. Her first 8 years of school, well, 9, counting kindergarten, before she'd been enrolled in public school. Edgewater High. 20 years passed. She probably should have gone to Lila's reunion meeting, but the truth was she couldn't stand the woman. Nor had she felt any different 20 years ago, when Lila had been jealous of her and her father's money. And for her part, Anessa, studious, hadn't liked the flinty blonde who had flitted from one boyfriend to the next, always looking for someone a little more popular or wealthy or cool or whatever. Lila had flirted with just about any boy or man, for that matter, as she'd always gone for someone older. In that regard, Anessa had been surprised when Lila had settled on Luke Hollander. He wasn't wealthy, and he was only a couple of years older and no longer a football star. Yet Lila had set her sights on Rachel Gaston's brother and become Rachel's best friend. For a while. Anyone with any brains could see that she was only using Rachel to get close to Luke. Probably Rachel had known it too, because their friendship had seemed to fade with time. Anessa smiled at that. Well, who could blame Rachel? Lila had become her damned stepmother-in-law. Sick. Using her key, she unlocked a door to the schoolyard and stepped outside. It was twilight, the gloom settling in. The area was completely enclosed, 2 sides blocked by the wings of the old school. The third boundary, directly across from where she stood, was the old chapel, now crumbling under a sloping roof, its tall spire and silent bell tower knifing into the dusky sky. The final wall of the schoolyard was a high wooden fence with a locked gate leading to the parking lot of the hospital. She remembered 3rd grade when she'd fallen from the monkey bars and sprained her ankle. Sister Mary Rosarius, the meanest nun in the school, had hustled her through the gate and along a covered portico to the hospital, all the while muttering that Anessa would be fine, that she shouldn't be a baby and should stop crying. "Oh, now don't blubber, say a prayer with me," she'd ordered, walking fast, the skirt of her habit swishing with her strides. "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus." Anessa hadn't prayed, and she hadn't stopped sobbing. Now she stepped into the yard, where a few insects buzzed in the coming night, and a lone security lamp offered dim, uneven light over the tufted dirt where once there had been grass. Shards of broken glass glinted in the bald patch of earth. She'd spent many hours here, laughing and playing and scheming with her friends. She remembered the bells in that spire, tolling for Mass, or to signify the end of the school day. Father Timothy had been the principal, and though there were a few nuns employed at that time, most of the staff were lay people. She recalled, "Scrape." What was that? She froze.
Was it a shoe scuffing the earth behind her? Whipping around, Anessa expected to see him crossing the patchy yard, a devilish smile slashed across his jaw, his mischievous eyes sparkling. But the space beneath the porch was empty, devoid of life, quiet and still, grimy windows dark. Jesus. Her nerves tightened. She licked her lips, eyed the entire yard with its misshapen pieces of broken equipment and shadowy areas where blackberries and weeds had taken root. Her throat was as dry as dust. They'd gone too far this time. These clandestine meetings always had an edge to them, a little bit of danger that made the sex all the more potent. Cheating on their spouses wasn't enough. They each liked a little more adrenaline in their bloodstream. But this, what they'd planned tonight, had crossed a line. Another line, she reminded herself, as a bat flew toward the old tower. The hairs on her arms lifted, and her pulse pounded in her ears. "Are you here?" she whispered. She waited. No response. Just the wind rustling a piece of paper that danced across the broken concrete walkway. Anessa was already tense. She'd read about Violet Sperry's death, seen the report on the news, heard gossip in the coffee shop. All she knew was that Violet had been killed by an unknown assailant, murdered in her home. Here, in sleepy Edgewater, where the news was so slow that the local paper had to dredge up the fatal accident that had taken the life of Luke Hollander. Her insides turned to ice. She'd been there that night, in the cannery. The noise, the confusion, the sounds of firecrackers booming, or had it been real gunfire? Along with the steady click of pellet guns, the shouts and screams. She'd witnessed Luke go down, seen him bleed out, thought his sister Rachel Gaston had actually shot him, until she realized she hadn't been sure. Hadn't the spark from the real gun been off to Rachel's side, or had she been mistaken? She hadn't been certain then, and she sure as hell wasn't now. She pulled her jacket around her more tightly and wondered how long she would have to wait. Not long. She wasn't going to waste her time. Creak! The sound echoed through the yard, and she shot a quick look over her shoulder to spy the broken, lopsided merry-go-round slowly spinning, rotating on its ancient spindle, casting a moving shadow beneath the solitary lamp. What the hell? The merry-go-round was turning from the wind? But the breeze was slight, not strong enough to push the old structure on its rusting pivot. For a second, she thought of the ghost stories they'd told one another as kids, insisting that the chapel was haunted. "Just kids, being kids," she whispered now. But her skin was prickling, and her nerves were strung as tight as the strings of Sister Catherine's cello. "It's nothing." But she decided it was time to go. This was a ridiculous place to meet anyway. Why had he even suggested it to begin with? Why had she agreed? Oh yeah, because they each had a connection here to this complex, and they'd both gone to elementary school here. So what? She was out. She reached into her pocket for her keys. The merry-go-round slowed, groaning to a stop. Her heart began to race. She started for the door to the school and heard the clank of chains. What? Turning quickly, she swept her gaze over the entire yard to land on the pipe structure from which the swings were suspended. Of the 3 swings, one was broken, missing its seat, the second unmoving, and the third swaying slightly, its chains rattling as if someone had just gotten off. That was it. She was out of here now. Even if he was here trying to scare her, she was over it. Their romantic trysts had been sexy and wanton, wild and dangerous, but this, being scared out of her mind like this when someone she knew had just been murdered? Nope. She'd been an idiot to agree to it. Walking quickly, she made her way to the door she'd used to enter the area, grabbed the big handle, and tugged. The door didn't budge. What? But she'd just unlocked it. She pulled again. Nothing. Crap! If he was out here and this was supposed to be some kind of a joke, she'd kill him. She decided to tell him so. "If you think this is turning me on with all this cloak and dagger stuff,
You're wrong. No response. Fear skittered up her spine. Did something move over by the chapel door, in the alcove of the doorway? Her heart clamored. She fumbled with her keys, forced the right one into the door. The lock clicked open, thank God. Thump, 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 faster and faster. The sound of bats flying, whirring overhead. No, footsteps running, gaining speed toward her. She pulled the door open and bam! A big gloved hand shoved it closed. The razor-sharp edge of the door scraped her finger, digging into her flesh. Ow, shit! Nuh-uh-uh. A voice growled at her ear, warm and heavy and not the one she'd expected. A new fear slithered through her. Who was this guy? He pressed his body against hers. She felt him hard against her back, felt his damned erection pressing into her buttocks through her clothes, gloved hands tangling in her hair, tightening. No! Oh, God, no! She started to scream, but he slammed her forehead against the door so hard her nose cracked. Light flashed behind her eyes. Pain screamed through her brain. Blood gushed. Stunned, she sagged. Her knees buckled and she would have sunk down, but his body kept her upright, pinned to the door. Her scream was faint. A moan. She heard her keys, jarred from the lock, clink against the concrete. Don't pass out, Inessa. Do not. Fight. Scream. Yell. This guy was going to rape her or kill her or both. She opened her mouth to scream again, tasted blood running down her throat. Who was he? Why was he doing this? Fight, Inessa. Fight, damn it! Despite his weight pressed against her, she tried to twist, to squirm out of his grasp, but she could barely move. Her arms flailed uselessly. Her legs were pinned against the metal door. Another attempted scream. Big, gloved hands encircled her throat. Don't panic, just get free. Somehow get away now! He shifted. Her legs moved. Frantically, she kicked and swung with her arms, her hands batting wildly as she tried to scream, but only wheezed as his steely fingers gripped harder, dug into her flesh, crushing. Woozily, she realized she was being lifted off her feet. She kicked wildly, lost a shoe, heard it thud against the door. Kick him, hit him, bite him, get him off you, Inessa. Don't let him win. Do not. Fight with all you've got. He's going to kill you. She struggled. Her lungs burned. The other shoe fell away. Frantically, she tried and failed to drag in even the slightest amount of air. Nothing. Oh, God! Her lungs felt as if they would explode. Blackness pulled at her consciousness. Please, God, don't let me die this way. Help me! She swung as hard as she could, but her arm dropped uselessly. The fingers around her neck pressed harder. Through the pain, she realized she was about to pass out. There was nothing she could do but give in. As the blackness came, the old prayer whispered through her. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women.
This audiobook has been broken into multiple parts to make the download faster. You have reached the end of a part, but not the end of the complete audiobook. So please check your library for the next part of this audiobook.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.